Join us on an investigative journey as we educate each other on a scientific discovery, concept, or phenomenon.
Then we'll take a dive into the complicated and misleading world of pseudoscience to sort the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
And I'm Levi Bateman.
And this is IdioFacto. So this week, the news came out that one of the Ericsson air cranes named Christine, that has been doing some work on a fire near Mount Baw in East Gippsland, managed to flip and end up upside down in a dam right next to the Thompson Dam.
Which is a terrifying image if you know what these helicopters look like.
These helicopters are huge. They can refill their tanks of 10,000 litres in 45 seconds, and they weigh several tonne, and luckily in this case there were only 3 crew members on board and they all made it out safely. So it was in the process of filling that 10,000 litre tank from the dam. The cause of the accident still not known, but the operator said that the machine was fine and operating perfectly well up until that point, and they're known to be pretty reliable. So when I first read this, I thought, that's really odd, because we've had these in Australia doing a lot of firework for years now. Right,
like I think the most famous one was probably Elvis, and that was made famous in the 2009 Black Saturday fires. And since then, the Ericsson sky cranes and whatever name has been around in that particular summer have just about become household names.
So, this one's called Christine, and it's operated by Kestrel Aviation in Victoria. And the managing director, Ray Cronin, said after the incident, "I'm absolutely confident in the aircraft. They're a workhorse. They're a very reliable aircraft." So I'm not surprised by that. They've got a really good record. We've had no incidents like this in the many years that we've been using them.
And a lot of incident-free hours flown over many fires, over some absolutely shocking terrain and in terrible conditions.
Well, and this is a good example of shocking terrain. It's mountainous terrain effectively, and you're trying to draft water from a tiny little dam in a valley between mountains effectively. So the conditions are really treacherous, and they're usually like that because you don't get bushfires in the middle of civilization, you get them in the middle of nowhere.
Right, so that raises the question of the recovery effort. So is it salvageable? I mean, this is going to be one hell of a recovery in that sort of terrain with no highway to drive a 100-ton crane right up next to it. That's
right. It's not exactly the environment that you want a tow truck in, but it's still in the dam, and I don't know if they have any plans to get it out. It's sort of gone quiet while they investigate what actually happened. But like I said, the 3 men who were on board got out safely because it ditched into a dam, and it was close to the water at the time because it was drafting water from the dam itself. I'd watched a video fairly recently from Smarter Every Day, the YouTube channel, which is Dustin does a whole bunch of really good videos, and in this particular video that I watched, he was having a slight rib at Neil deGrasse Tyson, who had not argued with someone on Twitter, but had a discussion with someone on Twitter that says, an airplane whose engine fails is a glider, a helicopter whose engine fails is a brick. And in response to that, Dustin from Smarter Every Day, I'll put the link to this video in the description, but he said helicopter pilots use a technique called auto-rotation during an engine loss, and then directed Neil to the video itself. But I thought it was pretty impressive. Neil was really gracious about being corrected on this.
He was. I've seen this video, and he's a very gracious guy. Of course, a skeptic like we are, and he was willing to be proved wrong. But I did learn in a related video to that particular video that Dustin from Smarter Every Day was actually going to be a fighter pilot. He wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force, but it was his eyesight that let him down. Yeah, he's since had laser eye surgery, but at the time when he was applying, his eyesight was not good enough. He was nearsighted.
So, but he became a mechanical engineer or something, didn't he, for NASA?
So yeah, I think he's an aerospace engineer.
Casually an aerospace engineer, who cares? Well, not everybody on Twitter was quite as nice. Someone accused him of spreading misinformation, which I'm not sure Neil deGrasse Tyson can be accused of spreading misinformation, but it was probably a misguided tweet. But fair play to him, he corrected himself and was happy to be corrected. So
I don't think he was necessarily spreading his opinion as fact. It was just that, and it was probably just a passing comment that he was making.
Definitely a joke. That's kind of irrelevant. In the video from Smarter Every Day, it describes auto rotation as a recovery method, and the pilots that are featured in that video pretty much say that it's actually a lot safer to be in a helicopter that loses its engine than in a fixed wing aircraft, which I was surprised by.
Right, because this challenges everything. I mean, it's right what Neil says, and I think everybody would think the same thing, is that an airplane
you just think that
is just
it would drop straight down.
That's right. An airplane is a glider with an engine.
Yeah.
And it can do just that. It can glide. Whereas a helicopter, because of the very nature of it, it requires that engine and that power to use lift. So I'm interested to know how they can possibly be safe falling to the ground.
Yeah, well, of course, when you read a story like that, you go, having just watched that video, you think, well, why didn't they just use auto rotation? All helicopter pilots are trained in auto rotation techniques. Why wouldn't they use that to recover any problems? And I thought, how hard can it be to hover a helicopter over a dam? And it turns out it's damn hard to do.
I just want to go out and say, just on the record, I would have thought that it was difficult to hover a helicopter above a dam.
Yeah, but it's
30 feet above
like
a dam while you're sucking on 10. That is something that I would think is difficult to do.
Yeah, but in fairness to me, in Grand Theft Auto, it's not that hard. So
console hero.
Well, if you play it on computer, you can use a joystick, but turns out it's really, really difficult to fly a helicopter. Who would have thought?
Okay, me.
I've never been in a helicopter, so I'll use that as my excuse. You've been in a helicopter before, though.
I absolutely have, yeah. Twice.
You've definitely flown one, haven't you?
I have almost flown one, yes. I've been inside one.
By almost, do you mean you sat in the back?
I've seen all of the controls. I've watched a pilot use the controls before. I'm basically a pilot.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is. I mean, I can't say any more because rules 1 and 2 of Flight Club. Of course, don't talk about Flight Club. But,
wow.
Yeah. No, I have been in a helicopter twice. Once when I was about 3-4 years old, and I did a joy flight with my dad over Port Lincoln, and the other time I was working as a firefighter for the Victorian state government, and I was flown out of an area that was affected by fire because we couldn't drive out because all of the roads out of there had been burnt over, so we got flown out.
But not in an Ericsson.
It wasn't in an Ericsson, no, it was in a much smaller...
In a flying limousine, basically.
It was a limousine. It had leather seats. It was, reclined. It had a champagne dispenser. It was a fantastic aircraft. It was a wonderful aircraft.
Well, this one is pretty wonderful when you think about the amount of water that it can carry and the things that it can do and the environment that it works in constantly. But helicopters, like I said, my only experience with helicopters is flying them in video games. So that is not at all how they work. There's actually 3 controls in a helicopter that you have to balance at all times. There's a cyclic, which is the joystick looking thing that is right in front of the operator.
Mm-hmm.
There's the collective, which is sort of like a handbrake looking thing next to the pilot's seat that moves up and down.
Oh, that's not to do helicopter hill starts.
You would think that it would be, but then you've got 2 pedals as well, which control the tail rotor. Or this is something that I didn't know until I looked it up, but the tail rotor has the best name of any part of any aircraft ever.
Go.
Fenestron.
Oh, wow, that's excellent.
It's the best name ever. It sounds like, like an anime character.
Yeah, if I was watching a sci-fi movie and their spacecraft was called the Fenestron, I'd be impressed.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so the tail rotor is called the Fenestron, and the Fenestron is controlled by the tail rotor pedals at the feet, obviously, of the operator.
Okay, so you've got the pedals which control the Fenestron. You've got the collective, and
which is
this is
the handbrake.
This is the handbrake. Yeah.
Yep.
And then the joystick. What is this called again?
Cyclic.
The cyclic. Okay, so all of these are used at the same time. Like a pilot is monitoring all of these controls.
Yeah, and they all affect each other. So because of the complex way that a helicopter manipulates the air, one small adjustment in one of the controls drastically affects the balance of the other controls.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, with a helicopter, you've got a spinning wing, effectively. A fixed-wing aircraft generates lift by moving an aerofoil at high speed, and the aircraft itself is the thing that moves.
Right, and the thrust is generated by the engines, right?
That's right, and then the lift is generated by the air moving faster over the top of the wing, which creates a high-pressure system beneath it and causes lift.
Less resistance above the wing, so the wing and everything attached to it will move up.
Yes.
Okay.
So the concept is exactly the same in a helicopter, except instead of moving the craft itself through the air, the rotor is propelled by an engine, and the aerofoil shape is on each of the rotors.
Yeah, they are just big spinning wings, aren't they?
Yeah, they're basically just spinning wings. So you adjust the lift by adjusting the pitch of the rotors. So a steep pitch in the rotor will give you more lift, and a shallow pitch will give you less lift.
Right, so the steeper pitch is the equivalent in a fixed wing to like pulling back on the stick. You see in the movies, the pilot will pull back on the stick and the plane will increase in the steepness of the angle and it'll shoot upwards.
That's right.
Okay.
And the same thing happens when you come into land. If you have observed on a jet when you come into land, the wing will extend a little bit and it'll be a much steeper angle than it is when you're at cruising altitude, and that's to generate a little bit more lift so the landing is a bit softer.
Okay.
So the same thing happens in a helicopter. You at a steep pitch, you'll get a lot more lift, and the steepness of the pitch of the rotors is controlled by that collective, which is the handbrake.
Okay.
So we should probably stop calling it the handbrake because it's not in any way a handbrake. It just looks like one.
It's a good point of reference to anybody that's ever seen
a
helicopter cockpit, I suppose, because it looks exactly like that, a handbrake.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you can adjust the collective and the aircraft will move up and down, and the cyclic doesn't need to necessarily change. So the rotors don't necessarily need to change speed for the effect on lift to change. That's all done with the collective.
Yes, that's correct. It's an oversimplification to say that the collective controls the pitch of the blades. Yes, it does, but also the cyclic controls the pitch of a particular blade at a particular time. It's actually a pretty complex interaction. It's probably beyond the scope of what we need to go into right now, but effectively using the cyclic is basically like using a joystick. If you push forward, you'll go forward. If you push left, you'll go left. If you push right, you'll go right. And if you pull back, you'll go backwards. So the collective adjusts the pitch of the rotors and moves you up and down. The cyclic controls forward, backwards, sideways movement, which leaves us with the tail rotor. And what is the purpose of the tail rotor, I guess, is the real question. So it's Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the action of the rotors turning is a lot of torque, basically, for the body of the aircraft to handle. So in order to counteract that, you have to have a tail rotor with an opposing force that is equal or, depending on which way you want to turn, greater to the force of the gyroscopic effect of the rotors turning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you can point your nose in certain directions, is you can adjust the power in the tail rotor, and that's what the pedals are for.
Right, okay. So if you wanted to spin on a dime, essentially, you would stomp on one side of the tail rotor. It would either increase or decrease the speed of the tail rotor, and the helicopter would spin in that given direction.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. Any adjustment to the power that's delivered to the rotor will therefore affect how much power needs to be delivered to the tail rotor as well. And
okay, they're proportional.
You'll need to compensate with the pedals when you make adjustments on the cyclic and the collective.
Okay, right.
Basically, all that to say, it's really difficult to feather all three of those controls and keep it very stable, especially when there's odd wind conditions and weird updrafts and downdrafts, especially like those that you get around a fire.
Right, and I'm led to believe that hovering in one spot is quite a bit more difficult than flying in any sort of path, a straight or even a zigzag path. Right, okay, so things can go wrong. There's a lot of room for
things can go wrong.
Error.
That's
either
the
mechanical
bottom line.
error or machinery error, I guess.
Yeah. So in this case, my guess is that there was some sort of mechanical error that meant that the pilot lost engine power. Because if that had happened higher up in the air, the pilot could have performed an auto-rotation.
Right, and what is that?
Basically, when you lose engine power, there's a special clutch that disengages the main shaft with the rotors from the engine, so it can free turn. And so auto-rotation is the rotation of the blades by themselves, basically.
They start to act like a turbine rather than a fan.
Yeah, so instead of a fan, it's like a pinwheel.
Right.
So the air rushes through and means that the blades turn, and by feathering the controls in a very specific way, a pilot can safely land. It requires a lot of skill, and it also requires the helicopter to be at a certain height or an altitude high enough that the machinery has enough time to disengage the blades from the engine and then speed up enough so that you can regain control of the aircraft.
Right, so this Christine, this Ericsson sky crane that was hovering maybe 5 to 10 metres above a dam, it probably didn't have the time to do all those things.
No, so by the time the engine failed, the clutch needed to disengage and it needed enough airspace basically to build up the speed in the rotors to maintain lift. Obviously didn't have enough time.
Okay, yeah, this makes sense. I guess plus reaction time. Even if there was time, you're very close to the ground anyway. Even if it was physically possible, there's still the reaction time of the pilot to realise, oh, we're falling out of the sky. I better perform an auto-rotation. Right. Okay, so part of my job was I worked with an aviation company and they owned helicopters. And I was speaking to one of the pilots one day and he was talking about some helicopter accidents that he'd been in, and he's been in two. The first one, he was basically walked out of the wreck relatively uninjured. He was a lot higher in the air than his second crash, so he was able to perform this auto-rotation, and he hit the ground with minimal force. The second accident, he was a lot closer to the ground. He totally lost engine speed, and he spent 6 months in hospital and went through a full rehabilitation program, and it was because he was so close to the ground, there was no auto-rotation available to him, I guess. He couldn't perform that technique. Yeah, he was telling me that, yeah, you're better off, if you lose power, you're better off to be a lot higher, which is kind of the opposite of what you might think.
Yeah, it's better to be higher off the ground than close to it.
That's right.
I guess in the case of this particular aircraft, because they were so close to the dam, and it was a dam, they were able to jump out, and luckily there's a lot of dangerous spinning metal objects in a helicopter, and they managed to avoid all of those. So the Federal Aviation Administration recommends that it would be a minimum of 500 to 700 feet above the ground for a straight-in auto-rotation.
Right.
So if you're lower than that, it may not be a safe height.
Right. So that's a fair height when you think that a lot of the time these helicopters that are working in and around Victoria's bushfires are flying, between 5 and 50 meters above the canopy of the trees, which is nowhere near this 5 to 700 that's required.
No, well, 500 feet is 150 meters, basically. So
right, okay.
That's still, that's fairly close, but that seems awfully low to be doing a recovery maneuver.
That's right, especially one that's not a push button save all. It's requires a lot of technique, probably requires some practice.
So the bottom line is, if you're in a helicopter whose engine fails, you want to be as high as possible.
Right, okay. Well, I think the moral of the story is don't crash your helicopter, folks. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you can avoid it at all, just don't go in a helicopter. Well, but
it's worked for me for my entire life.
But also you should, because it's really cool. They're an excellent piece of machinery, and everyone should experience it at some point.
I mean, if you've learnt nothing else from this discussion, the word fenestron is one that you should really take with you, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it part of your daily. Try and use it tomorrow in a sentence.
People will think you're being rude.
That's right. Or
threw my fenestron out.
Or you're a sci-fi nerd. Cool. All right.
So-
Well, I'm going to talk to you now about Reiki. So it's something that I've sort of always been interested in, not interested in for myself.
I'm interested. I know absolutely nothing about Reiki, so all of this is going to be completely new.
It's a practice that's often sort of performed alongside the likes of yoga and meditation, massage, things like this, Tai Chi. So Reiki's a remedial alternative medicine. So it was actually first created in Japan in 1922 by a guy by the name of Mikao Usui. He actually died of a stroke in 1926, so 4 years later, but not before teaching thousands of people his newfound art of Reiki. So Reiki itself, etymology of it, so there's a two Japanese words, so Rei, meaning soul or spirit, and Ki, meaning vital energy.
Yeah, and Ki's a common concept in Japanese traditional medicine as well. That you see a lot of that. People talk about Ki as life energy sort of thing. I've heard of that before.
Oh, no,
I didn't know that was related.
No, so this is Chi. So you might be
Chi.
thinking about Chi, which is spelt Qi. So essentially, Reiki uses this Chi, which is the universal life force. You know, you've heard people, when they refer to Reiki, talk about healing hands or the hot hands of Reiki.
Okay.
This is using this Chi. So what the Reiki practitioner will do is they'll rest their hands on the body or just above the body of the patient, and they'll hold the hands in that position until the practitioner or the patient starts to feel the energy flowing through their hands into this other person.
So how does the person who's having it practiced on them know when the energy starts to flow through them?
So it can be a lot of things. So the feeling of this Chi moving through you can feel like tingling, warmth, magnetism, some sort of physical attraction, maybe even just pressure. So you're not necessarily receiving the practitioner's energy. They just become the conduit for this Chi, for the universe's energy. So
Right, so the universe has the energy and the practitioner just gives it to you.
That's right, they're channeling it to you.
So I couldn't go out and receive this energy myself?
No, not unless somebody that's trained in Reiki is directing it into you, or unless you become trained in Reiki and you are channeling it into yourself.
Right.
So the way that it works, so I sort of did a bit of research on this and watched some videos and read a few pro Reiki sources, I'll call them that. Most of them say that you can't necessarily tell the Reiki exactly where it must go. You can sort of direct it into the general area and it will go where it's needed, for example. So somebody can say, I'm feeling a pain in my abdomen. The Reiki practitioner will say, okay, I'll put my hands around your abdomen, and they can't necessarily tell it to go to your gallbladder or your small intestine. They can just send it into the general area, and the Reiki will know. This is what they say, the Reiki will know where it is needed. So
I mean, I guess my question there would be, the Reiki is what, omnipotent?
I guess so. It's almost like it has a consciousness. It can decide where it goes, how it delivers itself, and what effect it has on the human body. This is just what practitioners will say. I'm not necessarily sure it's defined anywhere,
right?
But it's supposed to be quite powerful. I read somewhere that 1 hour of Reiki can have the same effect as 4 hours of deep sleep. This was not cited, and there was no source that was provided with it to a peer-reviewed journal article, which, I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about these, but so I mean, you can do it on all sorts of things. I mean,
the minimum bar really for any science of any description.
That's right, any accepted theory.
To at least have a paper submitted to a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are papers studying Reiki that have been submitted to medical journals, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
So some of these videos say that the practitioners have done Reiki on people who are in a coma. So it's sort of used on...
Have they recovered?
All types of illnesses. That was not disclosed.
Okay.
I can only imagine that is a solid no. Or they may have. They may have.
Yes. Did they recover due to the Reiki?
Inconclusive.
Okay, well. Also, that's probably, to be fair to the Reiki practitioners, that is a hard thing to study, because
absolutely
you can't have a placebo control there, because one, a person in a coma won't respond to a placebo, and also it's immoral to only practice a potentially life-saving practice on one person and not on the other. So
That's right. It's very difficult to get a control group. It's very difficult to control the scientific design and scientific method of testing anything on anybody in a coma.
yes.
So, I mean, Reiki,
So I imagine there have been tests done on people who are not in comas.
there have been. There are many, yeah. So,
Okay.
so there's a heap of, and we will get to that. Absolutely. I will get to the
The nitty-gritty, the scientific
that's
part.
right. The journal articles that cover Reiki. So apparently Reiki cannot promise results.
Right.
It cannot promise
That's
results.
very convenient.
But it's often used to treat straightforward, simple sicknesses like the common cold. It's used to treat depression, anxiety, pain, and allergies. So apparently if you have side effects, it's all part of the self-healing process, and you just need to go back for further sessions, and you need to let the Reiki do its work. On top of this...
And presumably pay the practitioners more money to have more sessions.
You do, yes. That's right. Most
Okay.
most practitioners do charge their customers. Most of these videos and most of these websites and sources offer disclaimers at the start or at the end to say that Reiki does not replace regular doctor visits, which I think is probably a good thing. That's
Yeah. I mean, it's good that they mention it.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you or I could become a Reiki practitioner. So,
Oh, really? Wow.
we could. So basically, you need to undergo what's called attunement. ATTUNEMENT.
And like tune as in like tune a guitar. Attunement.
Right.
So you become attuned to the energy, I assume.
Yeah.
what that means?
I guess your frequencies align.
Right.
So yeah, this attunement that you must undergo is sort of like an initiation by a Reiki master. Ideally, their lineage will be traceable back to our friend Mikao Usui. So you should be able to trace her.
You or I could not become a master because we can't trace our lineage back to.
No, we could. We could because we could, as long as we could find a Reiki master who could trace that lineage, and then we just become...
Oh, so by lineage you don't mean genetic lineage.
No,
you mean
scholarly lineage.
teaching. That makes more sense.
Yeah. So basically, during your attunement, your chakras will open. You may see colours. You might feel a buzzing sensation.
So we're moving into a whole different area with the chakras thing because that's...
I mean, there's a whole other episode on this.
Yeah, basically.
I think this is just an overview of Reiki as a
Right.
whole, but I mean,
So-
there are a lot of other concepts in here that...
If we make the assumption that a chakra is a thing,
That's right.
and so during this attunement your chakras align
Yes.
or open.
They open.
Your chakras open.
Yes.
Yep.
So your chakras open. You might see colours, or you might see nothing. You might just feel very relaxed. So everybody's attunement is different. But the good news is that you are now a qualified Reiki practitioner, and you can treat adults, children, and I didn't know this. You can treat animals, plants, food, and water. So you can actually channel chi energy into food and water.
I guess that means that you can create a product that's infused with healing powers. Is that?
I suppose you
what
could.
that-
Yeah.
And has that been done?
Absolutely.
Does it have a special effect onto that in the water?
Yeah, apparently you can use Reiki to charge water, and it will taste better, and it will be infused with this Reiki energy.
And so because the Reiki energy has a consciousness and knows where it is needed, it will go wherever it's needed, basically, just from being ingested. Am I right in assuming that?
That's right. Yeah, that's the belief. Yes. So this chi is channeled into the water, and it will then make its way to the necessary body part.
In a session of Reiki healing, do the practitioners actually address any particular part of the body, or is it just like a general feeding of the energy?
So it's a general feeding of energy, unless, of course, the Reiki practitioner either senses that there's a part of the patient's body that needs healing, or if the patient says, I have sore knees, or I have a stomach ache, or I feel anxious, or I feel depressed. And then the practitioner may say that they're directing this chi into a certain part of the patient's body.
The chi is conscious and can go where it's needed anyway.
Supposedly, yeah. It's the job of the practitioner to direct it and make the path easier, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing is that sessions involve relaxing music, essential oils, which smell fantastic. Sometimes there's multiple people in the room, multiple practitioners, there's soft touch. It's a very relaxing environment, and you're in there laying on a nice comfortable bed for 45 minutes to an hour. So with or without Reiki, that sounds like a pretty relaxing, fantastic experience. I'd probably fall asleep at some point and wake up not wanting to get out of the bed. So, I mean, it all sounds fantastic. And then if you add the theory of Reiki to this, you're also receiving this healing energy. But clinical research has not shown Reiki to be effective as a treatment for any medical condition, believe it or not. So we'll go through a few here.
So I guess the major question before we start, and this will become more of a common theme as we go through various other pseudosciences, is it better than the placebo effect?
Well, it depends which studies you look at. So the earliest one that I'm looking at was in 1996. So there was a girl by the name of Emily Rosa, and she became the youngest person to be published in medical literature at 11 years of age, when her school science project was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is pretty amazing at 11 years old that you care about something enough to design an experiment that's fitting enough to enter a medical journal.
Well, and also when I think back to when I was 11, I believed in a lot of things that were less than scientifically rigorous.
Yeah, I'm going to say I wasn't a skeptic at 11.
No, definitely not.
No.
So I'm amazed that she was published.
Her school science project was demonstrating that Reiki practitioners could not detect the alleged life force under experimental conditions, which is an important part of this. Yeah, so there was a double-blind study. Reiki practitioners could not feel when a force was being administered to them, nor could non-accredited Reiki practitioners feel when a Reiki practitioner was supposedly delivering chi, this energy, into them.
Right.
So it was double-blind.
So the people who were supposed to be doing it didn't know when they were supposed to be doing it.
That's correct, and they knew what it was supposed to feel like, and when another Reiki practitioner was supposedly delivering the energy upon them.
I guess there's a few issues that you could argue for the fact that the effects couldn't be reproduced under experimental conditions. One of them is, if it was non-verbal, is there any verbal aspect to Reiki? Or does Reiki necessitate a verbal aspect? Or can it be delivered without
there are no chance that you need to. You can. There's no conversation that needs to be had. You don't need to ask for permission. You can do it on food and water and animals. So you don't need to necessarily have a conversation to say, can you feel the energy coming through you? If yes, I'll continue. If no, I'll move to somewhere else. So it's up to the Reiki practitioner to generate this.
So is there anything about the experimental conditions themselves that wouldn't be conducive to the healing process?
Quite possibly, especially if you consider that potentially one of the main healing processes is the placebo effect. And if you're performing it in an experimental condition, then it might not be as relaxing as what you would hope. You might not have that chilled out vibe. Placebo wasn't discussed. It was just about feeling the energy, feeling the chi in this particular study. Right. Could the Reiki practitioners detect it? And the answer was no. The next one discusses the placebo effect. So this was in 2008. This comes from the International Journal of Clinical Practice. So they analysed some randomised clinical trials, so RCTs, of the effectiveness of Reiki. So they started out with 205 of them, and of course only 9 met the inclusion criteria. They needed a specific set of good scientific design, adequate sample size, adequate replications, and of this 205, less than 5% actually was included. So of those 9, there were maybe 3 that showed potential differences between the group receiving Reiki and the group that received the sham placebo control. So 2 of these were to treat depression, which is subjective.
That's a hard one.
I'm guessing going into any session where you're told that it might treat your illness, you're sort of hoping that it might make a difference, and possibly depression. You might be influenced by anything that you think might help you.
And depression's hard on a number of levels because you're not a base level of depressed all the time. There's ups and downs and good days and bad days, and
That's right, and it's a very difficult thing to put a number on because it's not something that you can test with a blood test.
Yeah, exactly.
It is interesting that there was a difference shown between the control group and the active Reiki treatment group.
Right.
Again, this comes down to experimental design. So the article suggests that most of the RCTs were flawed in scientific method. So they either had a small sample size, a poor design, or the reports were poorly written.
Right.
But in general, basically, in conclusion, the evidence is insufficient to suggest that Reiki is an effective treatment for any condition. Therefore, the value of Reiki remains unproven.
In any scientific analysis, especially a meta-analysis like this one, using the word unproven is not saying with more evidence it could be proven to be worthwhile. It's saying that basically there's no evidence to suggest that it's worthwhile at all.
That's right. There are many things in this world that are unproven. Unicorns being one of them.
They may exist.
That's right. They've been unproven. Keep trying, I suppose. I guess lastly, in 2011, so a bloke by the name of William T. Jarvis of the National Council Against Health Fraud, which is a US-based not-for-profit organisation that sets out to expose health shams and unproven methods of healthcare, which is a fantastic thing. I did not know that this existed before doing this.
No.
So in 2011, this guy, William T. Jarvis of the National Council Against Health Fraud, stated that there is no evidence that clinical Reiki's effects are due to anything other than suggestion or the placebo effect. So that being that if someone tells you that something is going to help you because of the placebo effect, your body makes it help you, essentially.
And because a lot of these conditions that it's used to apparently heal are variable and subjective.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hard to quantify any meaningful effect. And basically, yeah, like you said before, if you have depression and somebody tells you that this will help your depression, emotionally you may feel better for a length of time after having this performed. But it's not because your depression is cured, it's because you're expecting to be helped. Yeah,
exactly right. This is placebo 101. So unfortunately, there's no central body of certification authority for Reiki.
Right.
So online courses take sometimes just 2 weekends to do, and you can actually do it online for under $100. I can become a qualified Reiki practitioner in 2 weekends.
Right.
Yeah. Interestingly, there are 60 hospitals. I couldn't find any Australian statistics on this, but there are 60 hospitals in America that offer Reiki. It wasn't brought into the hospitals because of suggestion by healthcare professionals. It was due to customer demand. So you are getting, a high amount of people that want to pay $40 to $300 per Reiki session when they visit their hospital.
That's a big difference too.
It is, I guess. It depends on the length of time. Like anything, if you get a high-profile Reiki practitioner, they're going to charge closer to the 300 mark.
Wow.
And if you get Levi Bateman, who's done his weekend course and wants to practice Reiki, I probably can't charge much more than this $20 to $30 for an hour session.
I mean, that's more than I make in an hour.
That's right, yeah. It's still a considerable income.
So what would stop you from doing that? Demand?
I guess so, yeah. You're not going to find people that would keep you going, I suppose.
Right.
You're not going to have 8 hours worth of Reiki sessions a day, depending on where you live, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. If you lived in the city.
Yeah, that's right.
You can see why people are attracted to it then.
To becoming a practitioner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some of these videos, there was almost a whiff of pyramid schemey type. They want to spread the word of Reiki, and even if it's one person at a time, that's a good thing. And each person that has a session of Reiki will enjoy it and will hopefully tell their friends, and they can spread the power of Reiki. This is how we see these things grow, I suppose. There is an American-based National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicines.
Oh.
So they're conducting a series of clinical trials to evaluate the efficacy of Reiki. So this is scary. So the US government-funded National Centre for Complementary and Alternative Medicines, or NCCAM, is conducting a series of clinical trials to evaluate the efficacy of Reiki. So this is literally part of the US Department of Health and Human Services.
It's unnerving. I've not heard of this organisation before.
It's changed its name, which is the National Centre for Complementary and Integrated Health. We're conducting a series of clinical trials to evaluate the efficacy of Reiki. From what I could find, this didn't really go anywhere, but it was funded by American government money, and it was into the millions.
Right.
So integrated health sort of looks supposedly at a holistic treatment, focusing on the patient and using mind, body, and soul to...
Okay, so all of those words kind of trigger the scientist in me. Complementary, holistic... soul, all of those kind of on their own are not really blasphemous words, but when they're used in relation to health practices, it's a bit of a worry.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, this is the scary part of it. So these 4 trials measuring the effectiveness in treating such disorders as fibromyalgia, which we will end up covering later, neuropathy, and get this, prostate cancer, and advanced AIDS.
Oh no.
Yeah, which is the scary part of this, and as we'll get into, if you're treating somebody with a pseudoscience who's suffering from prostate cancer or AIDS, if they believe that the treatment is helping them, it may be unlikely that they'll seek proven healthcare elsewhere.
I guess that's the real problem that you and I have with pseudosciences like this, especially when it comes to healthcare, is that it's not just that we're snarky skeptics who want to prove people wrong all the time, but this is actually harmful to people who believe in these treatments and therefore neglect, proven peer-reviewed medicine.
Yeah, exactly, and highly effective.
Science-based.
Yeah, accepted as effective in the medical community.
Yeah, that is a worry.
And as we've talked about, people can say that a lot of the time, as with a lot of these pseudoscientific practices, even if they are just a placebo effect, that's still helpful. But the biggest thing, and you'll hear us harp on about this, but the placebo effect doesn't work on children, and it doesn't work on unconscious people or people in a coma.
The message to take from it is that without a demand for these services, there won't be an economic incentive to practice Reiki.
That's right. So you have, it's a chicken and egg situation. You need to have practitioners, but you also need to have believers for this practice to be perpetuated, I suppose. Not everyone's accepting of it. The British Advertising Standards Authority has objected to Reiki's claims at least 5 times in recent years, right, mainly for claiming that it could treat a wide range of health problems, and that particular advertisement that was put out was shut down. Somebody's watching, I suppose. As with most pseudoscientific treatments, Reiki has very few or zero side effects, and it's not dangerous to participate in. Where it might become dangerous is where it's used as a substitute to professional medical care to treat ailments, and not to mention regular Reiki visits can become quite expensive. I'm not saying that a Reiki session isn't very, very effective in relaxing you, and it could be used to treat something like anxiety, because you are...
Yeah, but it's the relaxation that is doing it. It's got nothing to do with the practice.
Exactly. It's not because of the chi. It's probably because you're lying on a bed in a quiet room with some relaxing music playing in the background, with a delicious smell of lang lang and peppermint filling your nostrils.
That sounds quite nice, actually. I might go and have a Reiki session just because it sounds like it would be relaxing.
Yeah, well, you don't have to pay $40 to $300 to do that. You can go and lay
Perhaps
on your bed.
We could go and get a Reiki or we wouldn't even need a license. We'll just make up our own Reiki association, put up a sign saying that we're accredited by this Reiki association, turn on some nice music, burn some nice incense, and call it a day.
Yeah, well...
Make $30 an hour for it.
Or save $30 because we won't have to visit the Reiki practitioner. We can do it ourselves.
I think our only clients would be each other, so... Thanks for listening to IdioFacto. Forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other socials at IdioFacto. Links are in the show notes.